There is a particular kind of unease that does not emerge from what we see, but from what we fail to notice. From the quiet gaps between moments where something should have happened but did not. And in those gaps, where routine falters just enough to create uncertainty, there exists the possibility of something far more disturbing than chaos. A deliberate absence, carefully constructed and quietly maintained. And in the coastal city of Charleston, South Carolina, that absence took shape not through noise or violence, but through silence, repetition, and the unsettling realization that sometimes the most dangerous presence is the one that never announces itself at all. In a neighborhood defined by its historic charm and quiet dignity, where narrow streets curved beneath the weight of time and homes stood as enduring reminders of lives lived within their walls, Rebecca Lawson had created a life that was both structured and solitary. A life shaped by her work as a freelance financial consultant and her preference for routines that offered stability in a world that often felt unpredictable. She was 38 years old, thoughtful, disciplined, and deeply private, someone who maintained connections with others without ever allowing those connections to disrupt the careful balance she had established. And it was within this balance that something began to shift, not suddenly or dramatically, but gradually, almost imperceptibly, until it became impossible to ignore. On the evening of February 9th, Rebecca returned home just after 6:30 p.m., her arrival marked only by the soft sound of the front door closing and the subtle activation of the interior lights that responded automatically to her presence. And as she moved through the familiar sequence of her routine, placing her belongings in their usual places and preparing a quiet meal, there was nothing to suggest that anything about that evening would differ from the countless others that had come before it. At 7:12 p.m., she spoke briefly with a colleague regarding a client account, her tone calm and focused. And when the call ended, it did so without any indication of urgency or concern, leaving behind only the quiet continuity of her evening. By 8:40 p.m., she had settled into her workspace, reviewing documents and responding to emails, and at 9:18 p.m., she sent what would later be identified as her final message, a brief confirmation that she would follow up on a pending task the next day. That follow-up never came. What followed instead was something far more difficult to detect, because Rebecca's life, at least in appearance, seemed to continue. At 8:05 a.m. the following morning, her email account became active. At 8:27 a.m., a message was sent. At 9:02 a.m., another followed. And yet, Rebecca Lawson was already dead. The illusion persisted for nearly 2 days, sustained by a pattern of digital activity that mirrored her usual routine closely enough to avoid immediate suspicion, but not perfectly enough to withstand careful scrutiny. And it was only when her responses began to deviate from their usual precision that concern began to take hold. When colleagues noticed that her messages lacked the clarity and structure that defined her communication, when calls went unanswered and follow-ups failed to materialize, the absence that had been so carefully concealed began to reveal itself, prompting a welfare check that would uncover a reality far more unsettling than anyone had anticipated. When officers entered Rebecca's home, they were met with a scene that appeared almost untouched, as though time itself had paused, preserving the space exactly as it had been left, the kitchen clean, the living room orderly, and her workspace arranged with the same meticulous care that defined her life. But in the bedroom, they found her. Rebecca Lawson was lying beside the bed, her body positioned in a way that suggested a sudden and controlled act. And while there were no visible signs of struggle, the autopsy would later confirm that she had been sedated and suffocated, a method that ensured minimal disturbance and maximum control. The investigation that followed was defined by a single unsettling realization: that the person responsible had not only committed the crime, but had remained in the house afterward, using Rebecca's devices to maintain the illusion that she was still alive, delaying discovery and extending their control beyond the moment of the act. The question was not simply who had done this, but who had the knowledge, the access, and the confidence to execute such a plan without leaving behind immediate evidence? The answer emerged from a detail that might otherwise have been overlooked. A series of scheduled service visits, routine, unremarkable. Over the course of several weeks, a man named Oliver Grant, who worked as a home automation technician, had visited Rebecca's house multiple times, each visit providing him with access not only to the physical space, but to the systems that controlled it, allowing him to observe her routines, understand her habits, and identify vulnerabilities that others would not have noticed. What made this discovery particularly significant was not just the access it provided, but the familiarity it created, because Oliver had been inside the home, had interacted with Rebecca in a professional capacity, and had established a presence that did not immediately trigger suspicion. On the night of February 9th, he returned. He did not force entry. He used what he already knew. The confrontation that followed was brief, controlled, and devastatingly quiet, leaving behind no immediate signs of disturbance, and after it was over, he remained, using Rebecca's devices to send messages, respond to emails, and maintain the illusion of her presence, extending the timeline of her life beyond its actual end. He preserved the routine. He controlled the narrative. Oliver Grant was eventually identified through a combination of digital forensics and service records, and when he was arrested, his confession revealed a mindset defined not by impulse, but by calculation, describing his actions as a process of observation, access, and execution, as though the crime itself had been the culmination of a plan that had been forming over time. He was convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment, but the case left behind something that could not be resolved through legal means alone. It left behind a shift in perception. Because what happened to Rebecca Lawson did not rely on force or chaos, but on familiarity, trust, and the assumption that safety exists within the boundaries of routine. And even now, in homes where daily patterns unfold with quiet consistency and digital activity creates the illusion of presence, there remains a possibility that lingers just beneath the surface of ordinary life, that sometimes the absence you fail to notice is the only warning you will ever get.